I want us to reflect on this question before we look at the psalm, and that is, how do you know what Christianity looks like? How do you know what the Christian life looks like? And to a certain extent, we all answer that question by way of our experiences, don't we? You might look at a family member, your father or your mother or your grandparents, and say, well, that's what a Christian person looks like. Or maybe you look at people in your church and say, well, that's what a Christian person looks like. Or maybe you have your role model of Christianity from a TV personality or a radio personality. And in a certain sense, all of these personalities help shape our view of Christianity. But this is also what the Psalms do. The Psalms, including Psalm 61, present to us a portrait of Christianity and say to us, this is what a Christian looks like. And so as we reflect on Psalm 61, I want to mention 5 attributes of Christians that are drawn out of this psalm. And the first is this, that children of God hurt. And you might say, well, that doesn't sound very appealing, but it is realistic, isn't it? Christians aren't people who have somehow become elevated above pain. We don't go around being happy and jolly all the time based on our happy and jolly experiences. Christians hurt. And that's what the psalmist reflects on in verse 2. From the end of the earth I will cry to you. Here's a man probably who's been banished from his place. Very painful to be away from home against your will, isn't it? He also says, my heart is overwhelmed. So here's a child of God who hurts. Secondly, we learn from this psalm that Christians pray. And particularly they pray through their hurts. And so the psalm begins with the writer saying, hear my cry, O God, attend to my prayer. So children of God pray through tears as they cry out to the Lord through their pain. Children of God also pray for rescue through Jesus Christ. We see Christ certainly alluded to in the second verse, which says, lead me to the rock that is higher than I. And Christ is described as the rock that the builders rejected, but who has become the chief cornerstone of the church. And so we see Christ here as the one to whom believers pray for deliverance in the midst of their hurt. Thirdly, we can say from this psalm that Christians remember. The psalmist here in verses 3 and 5 looks back on previous experiences to remind him of how God has led him in the past. In other words, what we're learning here is that pain doesn't obliterate the memories of God's faithfulness. And that's very important because sometimes pain can be so powerful that it feels like pain is all that there is. We see no way out of this fog of pain that surrounds us. But children of God remember back to a time when their whole experience wasn't this fog of pain. They remember prior cries that the Lord has heard. Like verse 5 says, for you, O God, have heard my vows. In the past, you've heard me. You've heard my cries. So children of God remember in the midst of pain. And then fourthly, because of this, children of God hope. Verse 4, you see, actually in verse 4, 6, and 7, there's a positive outlook. There's a forward-looking attitude in the midst of heartbrokenness and abandonment. He says, for example, I will abide in your tabernacle forever. You will prolong, verse 6, the king's life, his years as many generations. Verse 7, he shall abide before God forever. And what we learn is that expressing hope is powerful. Let me say that again. When we express our hope in the midst of pain, it's very powerful. And often it's not what we do, is it? We tend to express our problems. We express our pain. We express only our tears. But when we actually express our hope as hurting Christians and say, despite the fog of pain that I'm in, God is going to see me through. And we say that out loud. And we say that to other people. And we say that to God. It's very powerful. Affirming God's promises is animating. And then a final attribute that we see of children of God here is that Christians worship, even in the midst of pain. Verse 8, the psalm ends by saying, "So I will sing praise to your name forever, that I may daily perform my vows." We worship in praise, in song, but we also worship in life, fulfilling our vows, particularly the vow that we took in baptism to be devoted to the Lord our God. And so, friends, I don't know about you, but I need this sort of earthy portrait of a child of God. We don't need sort of glorified, sanitized pictures of what it means to be a Christian, that everything is always happy and jolly. We need to see what it means to be children of God in the midst of pain, in the midst of hurt, that we can pray and remember and hope and worship even in those circumstances. And that's what we see in Psalm 61.